So we've been catching some feedback. People are saying, I think the CHH, former CHH, I don't know how he brands himself, Fizzle, was kind of coming at you on Facebook. Maybe I'll put the screenshot up here. Like basically saying there's something unhonorable about Jay Witt, about Jehovah's Witness protection, not showing his face, not being man enough or having enough conviction to stand be put your face out there behind your words. And so I thought we kind of addressed it before, but to be honest, we really didn't. Somebody else commented on YouTube. They said, "I watched this twice, and I still don't know why Jehovah's Witness protection is in hiding." So, what say you? What would you say to people who are trying to figure out, like, does it take all that? Why don't we see your face?
Well, for starters, if I got you watching the podcast 2 times, that's a win. That's just a win. Just reserves though. But look, I mean, I can laugh about this a lot, but we live in a society where the Christian majority, which is the majority period here in America, they can't appreciate what it feels like to come to a conviction about your stance on metaphysical matters and then immediately lose every close relationship you've had up to that point. And I shouldn't say immediately, because at least in my case, initially I told it to someone in confidence, and I had hoped that it would stay under wraps as I was
told it to someone.
Well, told when I'm saying it, I'm just meaning told someone that I pretty much was no longer a believer. Okay. And I needed them to kind of keep it to themselves, and they went ahead and just told pretty much everybody. They told everybody via telling one person that. Then you know how it works. It's just like just play telephone basically, and the reasons for me leaving, as a human being, you want to give people, you want to be able to present something. Especially this really felt personal. Like this is like as personal a thing as anything you can imagine. Like this is something that I held really dearly. So of course, when there was a degree of shame even when I left. Like I don't know. I can't quite. I'm recollecting now. When I say shame, not because I felt like I was wrong, but maybe shame's the wrong word. But there was something nearly analogous to shame going on when I left, and I hadn't really worked out. See, that's the thing. I hadn't really worked everything out. So when you leave, you don't necessarily have everything worked out. And when I say everything worked out, I didn't know what I was going to believe. I just knew I didn't believe this nonsense anymore. I didn't know where I stood on ethics and all of this other stuff. A lot of that I had to work out later, because it wasn't like I pre-prepared all of that before I left. I just it just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was almost like an accident on a highway that you didn't see coming. You just, next thing you know, you get hit with this reality and you realize, oh no, this is not real. And then you have to pick your life up and try to make sense of it, which is why for you guys who we joked about being the first or something, but if I had something like this when I left the faith, this would have been very helpful to just see somebody had preceded me in doing that. I didn't have that. So, in short, I fairly in short order lost every significant friendship I had. Even the friends who kind of indicated they would try to be in contact with me, they basically shunned me. And many of them have never called me almost at all since. They just left me alone. And I quickly learned that this kind of information, that is what I believe about these things, is best kept to myself, especially since I think it's not real anyway. So in my mind, it's not real, it's not true. So there's no real pressing need to let other people know that I feel, what I feel about this, So,
So Jay Witt, I have another question about, or I have a question about, it sounds like what you're talking about it sounds like there was probably lots of maybe rumors or other things that people were saying, through the grapevine about what the reasons were, what happened exactly. We all know the game of telephone will just distort the information, down the line. But were you, number one, I guess, afraid of maybe being misunderstood if you had to kind of explain yourself? Uh, and maybe, I don't know, did you ever think about maybe showing your face now? You would, they would be able to attach a face to everything that that you've been talking about for the
Well,
last few weeks and things.
well, no, it's people assume wrongly that you're the worst kind of person when you say I don't believe in this particular God, or if you even say I don't
Right.
believe in God at all. They immediately assume that you're. They don't assume you to be neutral. They assume you to be evil. At least in my experience, especially Christians. So it's kind of odd that they don't understand why a person wouldn't want to. I mean, just if they think of what they think of as an atheist or an unbeliever, at least given when I was a Christian, the kinds of pictures that were painted, you get statements like the atheistic or the materialistic worldview, as though it's a monolith. Like people on this side of things
Okay. So they
are
wrote you in like
monolithic.
communism and
Yeah, and yeah,
okay.
they associate you with euthanasia, all kinds of ridiculous. Like, not that euthanasia. I don't want to bring other debatable matters into this, but they might associate you with like a certain kind of applied Darwinism, like where you try to like. It's eluding me right now, but there's their terminology that they have for this. Where
Social Darwinism.
social Darwinism is like, yeah, that's you have this kind of it's just all kinds of uh anything that ends with Darwinism. Usually any phrase they put together that ends with Darwinism has all these negative connotations, and they immediately assume like you can leave the faith and not even be an evolution. You could still be totally ignorant on evolution and dismiss Christianity as being false, you see. So I don't like the sort of assumptions that they attach to you without you even being able to say certain things. You can't address people if they automatically categorize you as this evil person. You don't even know what category of evil they're putting you in, but you know they're putting you in one of them.
Okay.
Which is just, and living in a society where we can't even elect. I mean, many of our elected officials are probably not believers. I mean, we've seen that to be the case. Even Donald Trump tried to act like he did his due diligence to show that he honored God or something. But this guy is clearly a secular individual, but he has to play the role. You see what I mean? So it's sort of like publicly, it's almost a necessary thing to play a certain kind of Christian role just to get along in society. And that's
Wow.
about as simple as I can say it. So if you come out, that's why I commend people who bravely want to show their face, but then you're often considered this with a great deal of antagonism. Like if you look at what happened with Brady, Brady comes out, they immediately start telling, why didn't he just leave quietly? Why does he have to try to all of these kinds of, still a human being. He's entitled to have opinions and to try to affect the world positively, however he sees that to be. You see what I mean? So not to make this any longer than it needs to
Gotcha.
be, but
Yep.
I don't see why they think when you're on this side of things, you immediately should just shut up and you should. And so, but anyway, this can affect your life in ways outside of just a discussion about. That's the best way I can put it. This will affect your life. So in short, I lost almost every major, like very serious relationship I had, because most of them were in church or whatever. At some point, you put a tourniquet on and you want to stop the bleeding. And you're saying, well, the best way to stop the bleeding is to just not be public about this anymore. And I had never anticipated ever being on podcasts or anything or trying to proselytize, so to speak, deconversion. So I never intended on being a public face for deconversion or to even speak on this kind of thing.
Can
I
I just
figured,
say this real quick too? Because someone said this to me recently. Like, so what do you guys live for now? It seems like they use the words, but they kind of couched it in a less insulting way. But seems like you guys spend all your time just looking to debunk Christianity now. And I had to kind of let them know, like
Yeah.
both Jay Witt and Albert have been deconverted from Christianity over 10 years ago. And both of them have been spending none, zilch, none of their time thinking about Christianity or things theological, and didn't even look back this way until my book came out. And they said, man, it was a chance for them to kind of look back on, like you said, Jay Witt, your process of deconverting. Had you had something like this back then, it would have been a lot easier for you. But
Yeah.
these brothers were not, they weren't spending the time that they do now. And even now, it's like one day a week they give me a couple hours to talk about this kind of stuff. These brothers have a life, they have jobs, they have, joys and all that. And looking at the Christian faith with an eye to deconstruct it is nowhere in what these brothers live for. So just so people know
Yeah.
what's going on with y'all. Anything you want to say on that, Albert?
Yeah. No, that was a great way you put it. And I, you know, in terms of summary and trying to getting to the heart of how we, like the deeper questions that we think about, about life and things like that. There's no like one way that I can, describe it. When we talk about like Christians raising the charge of, well, what's the alternative, right? Well, okay. Well, number one, there's a problem with that kind of analysis to the whole thing. It's, I would hope, I would value as much as a Christian would claim to value is what is above all things true, and what we believe to be a perspective on the world that, corresponds to reality the best that as possible, or things like that. So, but like I said, there's no one way to describe my journey for the last 10 years. I think a lot of things that I can tell you about my growth as a human being has been, going to therapy, right? Seeing a therapist for a number of years, and understanding my childhood, understanding, why I am the way I am. I know the Christian community likes to kind of, criticize secular psychology, things like that. But, obviously, it's a lot more interesting than the way that, Christians like to kind of debunk a lot of those assumptions, and a lot of, how they would prefer to go the biblical counseling route, or et cetera, things like that, which, by the way, they do borrow a lot from secular psychology and appropriate, in Christian terms. So, but, I've had to learn a lot about myself. I've had to, I think deeply about philosophy. I love reading about Heidegger. I love reading about, continental philosophy and things like that. And I feel like for me, it's I've just had to find my way to think about, these concepts and the world we live in, and the governing dynamics of, the world and things like that. Like, those are the things I'm interested in, and I learn about it, and you find better ways to understand certain things, and how things work and things like that. So it's it's a messy process, really.
Yeah.
But it's, I have learned to become to get accustomed to how uncomfortable that can feel sometimes. Do I feel like I have hope for myself and things? Well, it depends on what we're talking about, right? So yeah, that's the best way that I can kind of summarize it, I think.
That reminds me of something Jay Witt said in our last podcast that you weren't able to make, Albert. But he talked about, as I hear you talk about how messy the process is of trying to come up with answers to things. Like, it's not this cut and dry.
Right.
Well, if it's not a God, then what is it? It's not this black and white thing. But something Jay Witt said was, he said he called himself an anti-ideologist, in the sense that the Bible just seems to be entirely like it's an ideology for, well, then why did people sin? Well, then why did people die? Well, then why did all these things that it gives you a very cookie cut, clean answer, very simple,
Right.
even though it's not true, but it's simple. You can embrace it and you can run with it, as opposed to this process you're talking about that is messy, that you may not have all your questions answered, and you may not even be asking all of the same questions that you asked as a believer.
Yeah. And it's also kind of odd. I guess this will be the last thing I say really briefly, but it's very odd that they. I mean, clearly the solution isn't to have one system that. I mean, I guess for some people they. You think of these devices that you might see on like some home improvement network where it's like. It cuts up your potatoes. You can cut your potatoes. You can bake your potato. Like most of the times, it doesn't do any of those things well. It does.
Right.
It does so many things, but none of them it does.
Mm.
And it's like, okay, now that we got rid of this device that does none of these things well, like now there's a sort of a Maslowian hierarchical like gap that needs to be filled by another by another cookie cutter. It's like, no, you don't need this Maslowian hierarchical replacement because you've pulled this one thing that didn't really do any of those things well out of the equation. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I got
but
you.
it's like the idea is that you have this thing that wasn't really doing a good job anyway, and you've gotten rid of it, and now it's like, oh, well, what's the new thing that doesn't do a good job that you're replacing it with? It's like, all right, well, I guess you're not really getting the point of what we're trying to do here, you know? So
Yeah, good stuff. We'll leave that there.